appreciate that. Is this better?
Kenny Casanova, you can't be wrong. Everything's great about you, brother.
All right.
Everything's great about you. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special edition of Wrestling with the Future. I'm your host, Angelo DeCipio, joined by the Happy Haberdasher, the smartest guy in the room. If you don't believe it, just ask him. He'll tell you every time. We've got a great show tonight. We have a very interesting guy tonight. He's a unique blend of T.S. Eliot and P.T. Barnum all wrapped up into one perfectly dysfunctional character that we lovingly call a professional wrestler. He's best known as a pro wrestler on the Northeast circuit, and his career led him to the semi-known but albeit prestigious New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, and I believe that is in Massachusetts. Kenny is a DJ, a master of ceremonies, a shoeshine boy, part-time restaurant dishwasher, and also authors books when he has a few extra minutes. His book subjects include Brutus Beefcake, Sabu, Big Van Vader, the legendary late James Harris, Kamala, Tito Santana, and that's just off the top of my head. And would you please welcome to the show a guest we've actually had the bump once before. My apologies to him. Please welcome everyone, Kenny Casanova.
Thank you.
You're welcome. First of all, Kenny, let me, from the outset, apologize for having to bump you off a previous show for a lesser-known guest, but it was a very heavy news week, and we had to break some news that week. So I, again, apologize, and I thank you for joining us tonight.
I felt like Matt Damon on Jimmy Kimmel's show, just never getting the spot.
You're, as I said at the outset on the intro, you're known as a wrestler. You're not really known, well, you are now, but you weren't really known as an author. But you, like a lot of people, you have a knack for being able to put together the right words for the right people. And guys who aren't really, say book savvy or tech savvy, that sort of thing. Here's the thing, though. So a lot of guys have a story to tell, but don't know how to tell it. But when they latch on to a guy like a Kenny Casanova or even like a Scott Teal, you guys have a way of, wordsmithing this story in a way that it's not only captivating but appealing for people and easy for them to read. Which came first for you, the writing skill or the love of wrestling, brother?
So let me think about that for a second. I started the wrestling stuff in 93. Yes, 93, and I started teaching. I was also an English teacher come around 2000. So the kind of the blend of both, in that as a wrestling manager, which is quite often what I did, but I did wrestle some. Your storytelling, you're the mouthpiece for the wrestler. So I'm telling a story that way, performance-wise and all. Sure. And then I got into teaching English. I started to own my craft. A lot of English teachers will tell you that they're failed writers. So, they're out there trying to make a living off of their writing to some degree. But they're teaching it. And eventually come 2014, after I had done a lot of wrestling managing, and I even played kimchi for Kamala in the Northeast Independent a number of times.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know that it was yourself and Steve Lombardi.
Yep, he was more on TV. He did the WWE quite a bit. I did a lot of the Northeast, and then there were some other guys like Dan Murphy who played kimchi in Western New York, early 2000s. That's the PWI editor who used to write up all the 500.
Yeah, I forgot about him, Kenny. I really did. I forgot
a little bit too.
Right. Yeah. Well, my co-host is Dan the Man Sebastiano. He's got some questions for you. Dan, I'm going to don't you proud of me, Dan? Right at the top of the show, I'm throwing you the question. Go for
it. Most I've got to talk on a show in weeks.
You know what? I'm being nice to you. Don't make me smack you. Go ahead.
It's funny. Angelo had asked you about the history, kind of almost like a chicken and the egg sort of thing about your, what came first, the love of writing, the love of wrestling. Obviously, your biography of the books that you've written. If you don't mind me kind of inquiring, was that the order? I mean, if that makes any sense, like, did you have a particular wrestler you wanted to write for, or a story you wanted to tell that you didn't get to right away, or did you just kind of as they fell in your lap go with them?
Well, so the one who got away was King Kong Bundy. I managed him a lot, King Kong Bundy, and we talked about it some. It just never really happened. He passed before it could happen. I mean, I suppose I could write a biography one day. But autobiographies tend to sell better with fans. Fans want to know it from, the horse's mouth. But if you want to talk about how the first one came about, being as I played Kimchi some, I had worked some with Kamala, and he was my first book. I just gave him a call when I saw on a wrestling news line that he was losing the last bit of his mobility, his second leg, to diabetes. And pretty much what happened is world traveler that was very accustomed to going all over the world, and on his time off he was a truck driver, and you demobilized him. You made him stay home. So I felt badly and called him up and said to him one day, I said, hey, what do you think about maybe we could put your story together and try to help you pay your medical bills, put a book out? And he said, Kenny, that sounds like a good idea, but I'm going to have you talk to one of my financial advisors. So he gives me a phone number. I'm like, okay, I guess. So, and I call up ready to pitch, a shirt and tie type of person, and I'm calling Coco Beware.
Yeah, exactly. I know that story.
High energy, he's all excited, and he pretty much though he was cool. He's always been a good friend to Kamala, and he said, I want you to know, Kenny, you got my blessing to do it as long as you remember he's somebody's grandfather, and I want you to treat him like one. I don't want you to treat him like a shady promoter, And that stuck with me, and I said, you know what, I'm going to try to do this, best I can, and I just let him keep all the money for it. He needed it more than I did, So we did pretty well with that, and then other wrestlers wanted me to follow suit, and I've done a bunch of them now, so it's pretty cool.
Well, you know what, Kenny, can I pick up where Dan kind of left off? As I want to jump into part of that question. Given the fact that James just passed away, his book is actually starting to sell again. Are you donating the proceeds or profits of that book to his family?
Yeah, it all has consistently gone to his family. So I run his website, and he had a number of things on his website. So what would happen is, every month or so, I just PayPal him over what the sales are. So he would pay by tens through there, occasional autographed toys and stuff like that. Also, people would put requests in, and we would have them mail stuff to him. I think sort of like the Hogan Beat Shop. You could mail in memorabilia, and Kamala would sign it for like $20 or something and send it back. You know, I became his agent to some degree, his brand manager, I guess. So.
I got to know James a little bit while he was up here in the Northeast for a while.
Right.
He was a frequent visitor to my father's restaurant in Camden, New Jersey.
Oh, okay.
And he worked for my my other friend, the late Larry Sharp. And Larry was my friend and mentor in wrestling. And, Larry would hire Kamala often, to work shows because he could get him at pretty much at a moment's notice. Yeah. Unfortunately, or fortunately for Larry, James wasn't getting the kind of bookings that he had when he was on television, of course. But it worked out for us because we got to see Kamala regularly up here.
Right.
The fact that the book is called Kamala Speaks, how much input, and I'm sure he had some, but how much of the verbiage is actually James Harris, and how much is Kenny Casanova?
So, that's a good question. And I would say that I tried to keep it as much and authentic as him as possible. But from time to time, you'll go into history and you'll go into match results and things like that. And those moments are quite often, as is any ghostwriter type situation, the ghostwriter or the co-author taking some liberties trying to put that information into their voice. And I did that here and there. But what we really tried to do is, James is kind of fun and, pretty laid back and stuff, is whenever that would happen, I tried to find the funny in everything. That's basically how I approach a lot of these books and try to keep it light. I knew that Kamala wasn't like a Rhodes scholar and isn't going to be using like super high vocab words and such. So, same with Sabu, but maybe Tito Santana would more because he's a teacher himself. So there might be a few more, places where you would embellish and try to flower up the language just a little bit. But so I'd say you want to say probably 80-20 maybe as far as percentage-wise.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, it's actually funny to continue off of what Angelo was just asking. You mentioned you wanted to do more autobiographies to get the words from the wrestlers. And obviously you mentioned Tito Santana being a teacher, and there's been several high-profile wrestlers who have been educated and well-spoken both in and out of the ring. I'm curious, and I'm not asking this as a drop dirt question, but was of the wrestlers that you worked with to write books, which one surprised you the most for how well spoken or how articulate they could be with their stories? That's
a good question too. Probably Vader. Vader's super smart. You picture him, from the Rocky Mountains and all his crazy stuff that he would say, a WCW against Sting or what have you, and him getting, excited. But quite often he had a mouthpiece because that was the way to go. The monster usually had a manager that would do the talking for him, and then his language would be his actions in the ring for the most part. You wouldn't sit down and have a conversation that often with Godzilla, or
yeah,
right. To keep the character going, usually that would be the move. And he followed that pretty well. So in doing his book, he was very particular about wording, very, very much so. And,
well, Kenny, before you go too far, because I think I know where you're going with this. Sure. I had Scott Teal here, and Scott began Vader's book. And they actually talked, about putting a book together. You're aware of that?
Yeah, I think he told me this just recently. I didn't realize it at first.
And actually Scott wanted me to kind of get the rest of the story from you, because you actually wrote Leon's book. And I had, in the interest of full disclosure, Scott Teal was here and said this himself, so you can go back to the show and sure. Watch it. That he gave Leon a recorder and gave him a tape recorder and tapes to speak into and tell his story, and he sent him a list of questions. And Leon was just kind of very, to use Scott's terminology, very difficult to work with. Did you find that to be the case? Was he a hard ass to work with?
Okay, so to politically answer this, yes, he was difficult to work with. However, understand why. He had a very vision of what he wanted it to come out like, and we rewrote the book a number of times.
Right.
It changed drastically. Maybe we had finished it was 90% done, and then he got a diagnosis that he had 2 years to live. So then, being a thoughtful individual, he knew that he had an expiration date, and eventually he was going to be gone from this world and wanted to not leave.
Kenny, and that's a really, really great spot. And then, not to interrupt you, but it's really, really important that I say this while it's fresh. People forget that that basically Leon had been given, and I hate to use this term, but a death sentence, basically. Yeah. But what was he trying to say? What did he want to convey? And what ended up being conveyed? And how far or how close to his original vision were the two of you able to get?
Yeah, so starting out, he was a little bit more unfiltered, a little bit more, for instance, you probably heard the story of Paul Orndorff getting in a fight with Vader backstage, kicking him with flip-flops.
Yeah.
Side of the story.
The shower fight, yeah.
Yeah, and was pretty much like, screw Paul Orndorff. That was, BS. It was as much his fault as it was mine, this and that. And but then the second time around, he was more, mindful and said, this was a long time ago. I've made peace with him. I don't want to delve in negativity. I'll give you a little bit of the story, and it was more like that. So it was less angry. And I think he softened a few places where he may have been angry in the past, knowing that with him gone, that's what was going to be left behind. That's what people were going to remember him by. So we changed a lot of the tone in the book. Yeah. And I think it was smart, though. I think it was good because, maybe in places where he would bury Michaels and bury Flair for some business thing that he didn't agree with or, what have you, he went back and he said, he pointed out different times where he was able to make peace again with maybe Michaels at Hall of Fame, where he wasn't going to put that in before, and then he did. They had a little nice. We put that in the book, So.
It's interesting because I'm looking at the book covers. And by the way, you can't see this because you're not here, but behind me are a number of your book covers that I have displayed. And I see, with the only exception of Kamala, there are a number of people up there who have been categorized from one time or another of being difficult either to work with or do business with. And I'm looking at Brutus Beefcake. I'm looking at Sabu. I'm looking at Greg Valentine. I'm looking at Tito Santana. And of course, I'm looking at Leon White, and James Harris Kamala. Now, like I said, with the exception of Kamala, who you never hear a cross word about from anyone, all of these other guys have had a reputation at one time or another of being, a little hard to do business with or work with. What was your take on all? We'll go name at a time. Dan, why don't you explore the rest of that with Kenny? Let's talk about. Let's start with Tito.
Okay, you touched on Vader and you mentioned Tito being a teacher. My experience is, a little hit and miss. He can be a little rough around the edges, for lack of a better term, especially from the promotion side. Usually other wrestlers speak more kindly of him than people he's worked for, at least in my experience. I've never met or worked with him. So I'm curious, we'll start there and then we'll go around. Did you have any issues running into that? How did that narrative come about?
So I'm confused. Did you say Tito or Vader there?
No, we were, I kind of transitioned from Vader. I was talking about Tito Santana.
Okay. Yeah. No, actually, what probably made that easier is as a kid growing up, I was a super fan of Tito Santana. He was the one that was more relatable. Hulk Hogan was like a god. He was like a superhero, Right. So, but Tito, you could kind of picture, being more of a common person and rooted for him to win, rooted for him to beat Valentine and regain the belt. So the underdog kind of after his leg was broken and this and that. So I think probably I was more happy to do his. Maybe, you know what? I hadn't thought of this before, but you guys say as a collective, you think it might have been more difficult to tackle these. Well, probably I was given a little bit of a pass, maybe a little hall pass from the guys, because I was also a wrestler. I was also a manager. So they weren't dealing with a shirt and tie. They were dealing with a guy that was in the locker room that had worked with them before, and they sort of capacity. So that probably helped.
Sure. Yeah. You know what? I didn't think about that, Dan. That goes a long way back in that.
That's a fair point. If I can expand on that a little bit, I too, growing up, I was a fan of Tito Santana. He did have one very prominent reputation, and that's that he was always a reliable workhorse. And I know little bits like, other than Hulk Hogan, he's the only other performer in WWF that had a match at the first 9 WrestleManias, and he was Intercontinental Champion, and he, Survivor Series and any events you needed him for. Did that workhorse mentality, and the fact that he still, I believe it was 2018 was his last official match, and I mean, still, kicking and working. Did that attitude, that workhorse, the go, did that come through in the book, or was he, as he got older, a little more laid back?
As far as wanting the product to get out, is that what you mean? Like pushing to make it happen?
Or just kind of, calling you a couple times a day. How's this going? How does this sound? Some people are a little more driven than others when it comes to having a ghostwriter.
Yeah, no. Well, he was particular in that he wanted it to read a certain way. He's always been, the baby face. He's never was heel. No heel promos of him in existence. So I don't think people know what he would sound like angry, unless you were really a shady promoter that screwed him somewhere,
You're right.
But, as far as that's concerned, he was always super nice, super gentleman, super friendly when we talked. He wanted to be portrayed as such. He didn't want the book to come off negative, bitter. There was a book that came out before this one. It was about 150 pages or so, where it was a little bit more bitter sounding, and it really wasn't, in my opinion, it didn't sound like his voice to me when I read it. It wasn't that it was a bad book, but it was written at a different time. It was written early 2000s, maybe, or maybe even before that. And it was one of these like library jobbers that like you would go to, a school library, and there is a little thin book about Tito Santana.
Yeah.
So this is 4 times the size, and I think we more encapsulated, the kayfabe, the behind-the-scenes type stuff now. The old book kind of read like, I tried my very hardest to win that night, but I just didn't win, So, but this one would explain why he didn't win, politics or something. So it's more up the alley, and I think it's more along the lines of who he is now, which everyone says is a super gentleman, nice guy to everybody.
Well, if I can actually, one final follow-up, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to have the expansion. A few weeks back, we had Brian Pillman Jr. on the show.
Oh,
and
nice.
It was one of the more interesting interviews we've done because he bounced back and forth in the interview in and out of kayfabe. Like he was telling the story about getting picked up for this battle royal. And he's like, he called me and he told me, look, you're going to go in, you're going to be 10th, and he starts telling the story like a book, like how it got booked. And then he's like, and I went out there and I had, dig my hardest. And
I tried real hard. Yeah.
He's in character.
You remember that, Dan?
Yeah, exactly. And he bounced back and forth between Brian Pillman Jr., the character, and Brian Pillman Jr. telling us the story of his career. I'm curious from your perspective, because some of these guys, Beefcake and Greg Valentine, could start talking stories now, and 100 years from now still be talking. Did they have any? I'm just curious, like kind of maybe a force of habit or whatever, fall in and out of character, or was it a lot more just straightforward?
I don't think with me as much, but it could be in some cases where they had told the same bullshit over and over that they don't remember anymore, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does.
So let me give an example of this. If you listen to a shoot interview with like Hacksaw Duggan, he'll tell the same kind of stories over and over and over again, because those are the stories that the fans really like. They want to hear about him in the Iron Sheik. They want to hear about him coming up with Andre and stuff. Yeah. And I think some of these guys have the same story that they've told so much that story gets better and better and better, but it's not necessarily truer and truer and truer. Sometimes, what's the Dusty Rhodes line? Like, never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Exactly.
Right. And so
they say that they say that in the newspaper business. In fact, that quote, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, Dan, the smartest man in the room, Sebastiano, that quote is attributed, I believe, to William Randolph Hearst.
Oh, there you go.
Never. how did it go?
Never let the quote was, there were two quotes, and then Kenny just nailed one of them. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. The other one is, when rumor is greater than truth, print the rumor.
That's great.
And that's true. That William Randolph Hearst. Check it out. I'm not even ribbing you. You really have to.
Nice.
You can't make this shit up, bro. Okay? And I tell people, that's my tagline. You can't make this shit up. You know, Kenny, we had recently, Dan and I had Stephen Plim on the show. Now, you probably don't know who Stephen Plim is, but he wrote a book about his friend Tiny Tim. He was Tiny Tim's best friend and manager.
Oh, nice.
And one of the things that he told Dan and I, but one of the things that he debated in putting this book together was how much do I put in? How much, of the salaciousness do I put in? Because, Tiny Tim was a notorious horn dog, but he was also a devout Catholic and prayed 5 times a day.
Very layered.
I mean, he was like a real, what's the word he used, Dan? Dichotomy, a real dichotomy?
Yeah, the guy was the walking contradiction.
Yeah. And so, like, when you have a guy, if you've ever had a guy like that in wrestling, and I know a couple off the top of my head right away, and I'll keep my mouth shut for a while. But if you ever had a guy like that where you have to question, how much of this do I put in?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, though. It's when I'm the ghostwriter for a wrestler who's taking liberties with a story.
Yeah.
I know a guy that goes the opposite way and challenges them and really pushes to make them tell the truth, and maybe even so much so that now they're not being true to themselves, and you're not getting the actual story the way that the wrestler would tell it. So I say, if they lie in the story, get him to tell the lie the best he can, and challenge them and say, hey, fans might call bullshit on this because I've heard them say this before, that they don't believe you about this. What do you have to say about that? And if they stay strong to their story, then you got to kind of print it, because you're their mouthpiece, and you're writing for them. You're not writing like a newspaper guy who's seeking the truth at all costs.
By the same token, if you tell the same bullshit long enough, it becomes the truth after a while.
Yeah. Right.
It's true. I mean, Dan, pick up on somebody like that. Here's a guy, Dan, because I'm going to have to throw this to you, because if I even start with this guy, I'm going to go off. Ed Leslie, Brutus Beefcake.
Right.
Have a conversation with Kenny about Brutus.
Well, the man of 1,000 gimmicks, and 990 of them were terrible.
The man of 200 personalities, too. I'll shut
right.
up.
I don't like speaking ill, but from my experience, Ed Leslie is a notorious bullshitter. Some of the stories he tells are very much exaggerated, and unfortunately, the reputation, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Kenny, his years coming up with Hulk Hogan is another one who is notorious for stories that are expanded, and wait a minute, every time you hear it, the weight's a little more, the amount of money's a little more,
he tweaks it, Dan. He tweaks it every time.
Exactly. You were saying you don't challenge them.
I'll shut up now. Go ahead.
You don't push that in. I'm curious, when you get somebody like, say, Ed Leslie, or some of these other performers who better than I, being backstage, who might be telling the same load of bullshit 100 times, you feel comfortable putting your name on a book that has a bullshit story in it, or are you more putting your name on the fact that, like, look, this is the story that Ed Leslie told me, this is his words, by the way the agreement you have, the way the book comes off, it's not necessarily you writing it, if that makes any sense?
Oh,
yeah, no, I get that. And by all means, I do tell them what I think the fans would think. And in fact, if you read those sections where maybe I may have been questioning, maybe I had an argument with Vader about what I thought happened, what he thought happened. You may even see it where it says, my ghostwriter, Kenny Casanova, believes this. I believe this, and I would drop it in if I thought that something might make me look like I'm losing credibility because it was out there. But it doesn't happen that much. Usually what I would do is I would ask the right questions, and I think I would get the story told the right way, the way that I think it should be told. But at the same time, if Vader says I won the fight against Paul Orndorff and everybody else says that Paul Orndorff won, I can't just have Vader say, the opposite of what he believes, Right. So that's where we would tell it from his perspective and the way that he tells it all the time, So, if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, then let me expand on that a little bit too. Then, where you definitely are good to mention things. How about a narrative that I hate to say it because so many, and we've talked about this many times on the show, that the older wrestler is such a dying breed that there's so few eyewitnesses left to certain narratives. And maybe you're talking to somebody, say like Greg Valentine, who's been around for so long, where there might be half a dozen stories. He's the only person in the room that's still left. But the caveat is, that's not the way I'd heard it. So, from Valentine's lips, he said X, Y, and Z happened, and I'm trying to word this properly, where you might get stories where you only have one eyewitness left, but you still is not a credible eyewitness. If that makes any sense.
Dan, can I chime in here for just a second? Kenny, when I had Scott Teal here. Scott was also here with Nikita Brezhnikov, good friend of mine.
Sure.
And I know you know Nikki too. And I basically asked the same question that Dan is asking you. And it's a slippery slope with some guys. I said to Nikita, because we were talking about his book, When It Was Real. Because Scott Teal co-wrote Nikki's book with him. And I asked him, have you ever experienced a story that's your story that in and out, and had someone try to correct you on what is your own story? And he said, yes, numerous times. And I think what Dan is getting at, and it's along those lines, is, it's like, what do you do? Like, if there's no one else to bear witness to your story, do you take it for what it is? Do you corroborate it with, the next of kin or someone once removed from the story? How do you validate the veracity of something, especially if it's something of significance? Most of the time, you're talking about wrestlers, it's bullshit stuff. But once in a while, in the case of, and I hate to bring his name up because he was a friend of mine and I knew him, but in the case of Jimmy Snuka's book, which ended up, biting him on the butt,
Okay.
Like how much...
I think of his book quite often.
You know where I'm going, Kenny?
What's that guy's name? Chatham? I can't think of his name. The author who wrote the Jimmy Snuka book. Basically, he filled in some blanks. And he filled in blanks that would have been better left unfilled. Because by him trying to figure out what happened, people said, wait, this is a totally different story than Jimmy used to tell. And what that did was that opened up a can of worms again legally. Mm-hmm. And, so by throwing in what he thought was true against what he said, he might have had a hand in that guy losing his life because he got stressed out and he, went to court and the whole deal. They revisited this stuff that had been buried long ago. Now, don't want to take anything away from the other side of that, you know, if there's truth behind that, but that was gone. That story, he was, I think, let out of that legally, you know, so they brought it back up, and the guy passed away soon after that from stress and medical issues, you know. So if you're a ghostwriter and you fill in the blanks in such a manner that may not be true and just make for a good story, you have a responsibility, because you could be causing something like this, you know.
Dan, explore that with Kenny.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Kenny. The stories that came up, but not just between the book, but also the local newspaper that was running an anniversary story on Sergeant what was her name, Sargentino, on her death, that you had these okay, well, we've got this book that just came out, and here's what I'm hearing. So where do you walk us through that from an author's standpoint, to kind of expand on your previous answer, where somebody has, I mean, some of these guys, let's be honest, these wrestlers, you got stories involving family and friends and, you know, boys at the bar, girlfriends on the side. Where do you draw the line, or walk us through the mentality of, I want to put this story in the book, but we got to be really careful how we word it?
So sometimes less is more with some of that stuff, and especially in Jimmy's case, I would venture to say Jimmy probably never even read his book. And that, while that might sound odd, I'm not going to point fingers, but out of my books, there are a handful of the guys that I work with that I know also never read the books. They just didn't read them. They went along with what I said. They trusted me, and we put the book out. I bet there are sections of the books that they didn't bother to really read. They said, you know, write it like this, and that's how we wrote it, and then we pushed the book out.
Well, now, Kenny, can I stop you for a second? Because that's a really, really interesting point.
Mm-hmm.
How often are you given carte blanche to just go balls to the walls and tell the story?
It depends who it is. And just to give you a mindset, think about these wrestlers that have cut, like I said, the same promos over and over and over again for 30 years.
True.
How often do you guys go back and watch the full tape of your show? You probably don't. All right. So it's almost the same thing. I know, as weird as that sounds, I'm pretty sure Tito read the whole book cover to cover. He told me he liked 98% of it. There was a little bit of some rat talk in there that he didn't like, or something like that. He's like, the rest of it I was really good with, you know. But that led me to believe that he didn't read some of the early draft, because I'm losing you here, or something's going on. Okay. He maybe didn't read some of the early drafts or something like that. But I think he read the finished and liked it and stuff. And I don't think Kamala read all of his book, you know, for example, and maybe Vader didn't read all of his book. They're not big readers, and they've told all those stories before. And if they trust me, they're fine with that. But I think what happened maybe in Jimmy's case is he did the same type of thing. You know, what happened like this, brother? Then you go and did it like this and that, you know, and he didn't get enough information. If you've ever, same with Kamala, when you talk with both of those guys, they're not men of many words. So you have to kind of go back, listen to other people tell the story, and fill in the blanks sometimes. And again, the idea of being a ghostwriter, filling in the blanks, is one of the reasons why Mick Foley ended up writing his own book. He didn't like the way the original guy filled in the blanks. He said, it wasn't me. And he did his own, and he really raised the measuring stick and created almost like the wrestling autobiography that we see today, like the way that everybody has kind of moved up to that level. So, yeah, I think it's just a lot of quotes, a lot of talking to other people, doing your research, you know, to get that story right. And if you can't fill in the blank correctly, and there's some doubt, and you think that could cause some problem, then you paraphrase. You don't put it all in there. You give the Cliff Notes edition a little bit.
You know, Kenny, that's a really, really good point. I want Dan to pick up on this one. Mick Foley is a unique individual. There are, unfortunately, not enough Mick Foleys around. He's a really bright guy, and he knows how to wordsmith his story. Is it a danger? Is it a slippery slope, or is there danger in a wrestler insisting? I hate to use that word, but insisting or demanding that they are the only ones who can tell their story, and how much risk is there involved in a wrestler who insists on writing their own story against, what would you say, Dan? Against intelligent advice? I mean, what would go ahead, jump in there, brother. Rescue me.
That actually the you mentioned Mick Foley. One of my favorite reviews I've ever read was the New York Times review when his book reached #1, and they said that it proved that wrestling fans can finally read something longer than a tattoo. But
I remember that.
Mick Foley's a great example, and Kenny, you mentioned it, how he kind of raised the bar, but you also did that not also open the door to I mentioned like Hulk Hogan earlier, and some of the other, whether it be say friend of the show, for example, like someone like a Vince Russo or an Eric Bischoff, who are very open to tell stories that are completely contradictory to the way other people in the room tell the same story.
Exactly.
And I'm curious, did the fact that Mick Foley was able to write his own words from start to finish, tell the story from his perspective, yes, that raised the bar because of how good that book was, and it's led to people like The Rock and Jericho and others having also their own success writing. But does that, telling your own story, the entire burden is now on him? He doesn't get to say it was a miscue with the writer, or that was a publisher choice, something like that.
Dan, I think that's kind of where I was going with it, and I was muddling myself, but thank you, because that's really basically where I was going with it. Okay, yeah. I'll shut up now, guys.
Yeah, I mean, and some guys just don't have the power. They just don't have. They're not that good at the written word. So that's why some people will do very well with having their scribe do it for them. Mick Foley, though, I think he did it all handwritten on legal yellow pads that he carried around with him, and whoever it was that actually transcribed all that, God bless them. They had something like 30 legal pads or something that they had to sit and type. But yeah, so again, filling the blanks is huge. How you choose to do it. I think after Mick Foley read his copy of Vader, I sent him a copy of the Vader book when it came out, because he wrote a forward for it, a very nice forward for it, and sent it to him. And he said, I understand there are some places that you filled in the blanks. And he's like, and when I'm looking at them, he said that I wish you were around back early on, because you seemed to encapsulate him correctly in the areas where I think you had to fill in blanks, and you made a much better experience for the reader. And that was like, for me, that was my WrestleMania, reading his review of my book. I thought that was awesome, So he's very, very happy with the way that I filled in the blanks. And I think part of that could have been because I had been in locker rooms before, and part of that is I have an English background, so I was able to maybe craft the words in a decent way,
Kenny, have you ever flatly refused to pen anyone's story?
I don't really have enough time to tell the whole story. By the way, guys.
Well, I'm asking. You know why I'm asking you, don't you?
Did Scott Teal say something? Did you get this from Scott Teal? Now you're going to just work me to say it, but I started.
No, I'm basically. I heard. I'll fill again. Here you go. No, I heard that you were approached to write a book by this, and I'm not going to give the guy credibility or credence, but I heard that you flatly refused to work with this particular wrestler. You know what I'm talking about?
Well, I didn't. If this is Sid, I started Sid.
Thank you very much. I didn't want to say his name. Okay. I was going to wait for you to say.
I started Sid's book.
Sid Vicious. Thank you.
Started his book, and then what happened is there was a previous writer. There's a writer before him, and that guy decided, you know what? I have a draft of the book I wanted to put out. We had a falling out. Screw Sid. I'm putting it out anyhow. Now he doesn't have the right to do that legally. Oh. And so he put it out quickly under like a what do you call it, like a vanity type press or like you know, a quick print on demand kind of service. So he made a copy.
Yeah.
I bought a copy of it right when it came out, the day that it came out. And Sid quickly got it tied up in the courts, you know. So like said that I own half of what went into making what you just put out, and I don't want it released. So it's in the courts now. Sid wanted to continue with the book, and I said I don't want to continue with the book at the moment until that's all that stuff is done, because what could happen is if I start writing something now, the original guy could say that I'm using his ideas on stories and get plagiarism on that. In fact, that guy warned me he would do that, so that's why.
And that was the story I heard, and I didn't know how much I had the right to say, because I know there's a story there, and I know it was a great story, but I had to walk the tightrope in. Do I drop Sid's name? Yeah. Will he refuse to do my show? Like, who gives a shit? Yeah. Because I don't really care about having him on anyway. I don't like him.
So picture
that was the story. Yeah, that was the one.
Sid is suing the other guy, saying that you can't use my information. I would say that the other guy would be in perfect legal validation to do likewise and sue somebody else if a book is coming out that he feels that he pulled the information out of Sid, and now Sid is like rehashing that to another author, a certain.
But on the other hand, and we discussed it previously on some level, Sid is another one of those guys that Dan referred to earlier, who, you're never going to get the same version of the same story. There's always going to be a tweak,
right?
Here and there. Sid is just one of those guys who can't, for whatever reason, can't remember the same lie, so he like embellishes on the lie. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's also having,
and it really makes for a bad book if you're going to write a book.
Well, Sid's actually a great example. And Kenny, let me ask you if you've encountered anything like this, other than the reputation for flowering stories. I've seen enough interviews. I've actually crossed paths with him in real life as well. He also has a really unique vocabulary in that he'll tell a story and he'll put words together and you kind of understand what he's saying, but I've never heard anybody say it specifically in that way. That I could only imagine trying to transcribe that into a book. Someone talking like that has got to be difficult. Do you find yourself sometimes with people? I hate to say this because I know no better way to say it and not sound mean, but with people that speak English, but there's still a language barrier.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I mean, Sabu is tough to get some stuff out of.
Oh boy.
And Sabu talks like a sailor, and he'll admit that. So he's like a sailor, back in the 70s.
In fairness to Terry, though, part of the problem is you have to, if you want to deal with Terry, you have to deal with Terry's wife. That's part. And you're laughing because you know what I'm talking about, Kenny.
Yeah. No, that's the same with Brutus's wife. I did pretty much a lot of the business stuff through her.
Oh yeah, Missy, sure.
Yeah. When I worked with Hacksaw, like I did a stand-up comedy tour with Hacksaw Duggan. Like I promoted it and helped him and all with that.
God bless you.
But the thing with the wives, though, if you picture this, though, while they may be difficult, it's that level of difficulty that's actually probably kept these guys on the up and up and kept them going, because they may have been, their own worst enemy, and they could have been dead in a ditch if it weren't for them.
Yeah.
But no, I hear what you're saying. And I also don't want to rush this, but I have my own podcast at 8:30.
Well, I tell you what, we have an hour anyway. But thank you so much for joining us. I didn't want to not have you on because I felt bad that I bumped you.
Oh, okay.
We
can just do one guy. We can just go in depth. Like I said with Sabu, after I wrote the first draft, I don't know, for people who know Microsoft Word, if you hit Control F, it does a find. So I did Control F, and then I added UCK and found like 7,000 of them, and I had to like cut that down.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Kenny Casanova, thank you, my friend. You're a welcome guest here anytime. I hope to have you back again.
Thanks so much. We appreciate it. And I'm sorry to cut it short like this, but if people want to check out my books, you can go to WOHW.com and you can see the whole list of them there.
And plug your podcast, please.
Yeah, so the podcast will be on at 8:30, Wrestling Bookmarks. What I've done is I got guys like Scott Teal and Ian Douglas and other good writers out there for wrestling. We've built a group of us, and every Thursday night at 8:30, a few of us come on and we interview different people. We have a photographer on tonight from Canada named Andrea Kellaway. She's really good. And also in the future, we will be running on October 4th, the Cauliflower Alley Club's first virtual online pay-per-view on Fight TV, where we're going to actually try to help them get some memberships and, in this year where they had to cancel. So.
Oh, beautiful. And that's a great segue into one of our upcoming guests is B. Brian Blair.
There you go. Talk to him about it. He'll tell you. Basically,
oh, absolutely.
We ripped off.
I'm sure, Brian's not shy. I'm sure he's going to promote the hell out of it.
Yep. Sounds good.
Kenny, thank you so much, brother. Take care. Have a great show tonight.
Thanks for having me on, too. Thank you, Dan.
You got it.
Take care, brother.
Thank you. Bye.
That was good. That was a nice, short, concise, to the point interview.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Kenny's a great guy. Kenny Casanova, he's a young guy. I think he's been maybe 49 or 50, but he's been around.
Mm-hmm.
He's a character. I mean, that's what you and I talk about, Dan. That
Right.
where are all the characters?
Characters, exactly.
Yeah, and Kenny's a character, but he's one of those characters, like old school characters, that they had to be able to do everything, and Kenny can do everything.
Right. He was also one of the in the frame of the old school manager that you don't really see much anymore. You might have a mouthpiece.
Oh my God!
But
I miss those days.
It's funny. We were talking about this the other day, watching just reminiscing old pay-per-views, and it was the old. We watched an old episode of the Royal Rumble, and then an episode of Survivor Series, and I think there was both. Was it 90 and 91 respectively, and every match. Everybody that came out, every heel team had 2 or 3 managers, and there was mouthpieces, and it just, at one point in the Rumble, you had, I think, 6 or 7 managers around the ring, and it just gave this feeling of the spectacle being bigger than it was. You don't see that
and
much.
The only thing better than that, Dan, the only thing better than that spectacle was the spectacle of the managers getting into it with each other.
Right. Well, I mean, I remember as a kid, watching, like Hulk Hogan, or I enjoyed watching somebody finally get their hands on Bobby Heenan or Jimmy Hart, or the Wizard, or even some of these guys where it's like you want to see them get popped more than you do the champ defend the title.
I know, for real. Oh my God. Oh, by the way, we have gotten ridiculous feedback on our Mafia show.
I'll bet.
Holy cow, man, have we?
Oh man, you didn't get any horse heads. Wake up next to a horse
none
head,
so far. None delivered by Amazon or UPS.
We both still have all our fingers.
Yep, so far they're all working. Yep, we've gotten some really great feedback on our mob show. George Anastasia is actually coming back on September 17th. We got a couple of really, really big. Well, man, October, November, December is going to be nuts. September, we've got, of course, we been promoting this, Dan. September 15th, the legendary. I mean, we use that word a lot in wrestling, but this guy really is. The legendary Dominic DeNucci, at 89 years old, is going to be on our podcast, audio only. Dominic will not be doing video, but he'll be here with Davey O'Hannon and a gentleman I mentioned during this show, my friend Nikita Brezhnikov.
Oh, nice.
Who knows Dominic very well.
That's a hell of a panel right there.
Yeah, boy. And we've got George Anastasia coming back for part 2 of our mob show on September 17th. That was slated to be Dan the Beast Severn, but Dan is actually building a house on an island right now. It sounds like a story, but it's really not. It's a shoot for real. He's building a house on an, I can't make this shit up.
You know, it's funny. Don't remember the guests we had a couple weeks ago that had to change some things around because they had discovered a new civilization.
Yeah, you can't make this. We were going to have, and Dan brings it up. We were going to have a show. I've been looking forward to this show. Damn it, and we never had it. It was called The Life, Death, and Life of Jesse James. I had a guy scheduled named Daniel Lowe. He wrote a book called The Life, Death, and Life of Jesse James. And guess what? Daniel Lowe, the son of a gun, discovered a friggin' ancient civilization in the middle of Montana, of all fucking places, and bailed on us. So I had to go ahead and get, like, Vince Russo or somebody.
Well, that's
Speaking
one of those,
like
looking at my notes for the schedules we have coming up. That's one of those, like you say, can't make that shit up. He has to be telling the truth because no one comes up with that kind of lie. No,
I mean, for real. Speaking of Vince Russo, I sent him a couple of Wrestling with the Future t-shirts.
Okay.
And Stephen Plim's book, Tiny Tim and Mr. Plim.
Excellent.
Let me tell you who we got coming up. Slated to appear on Wrestling with the Future, and some of these guests are going to fill out the rest of 2020, and some will bring in 2021. But we have no less than you talk about a who's who, a stellar panel. Listen to these names. The aforementioned B. Brian Blair, Brian Pillman Jr. will be back. Beautiful Bruce Swayze, Hacksaw Butch Reed, female referee in the WWF, first one ever, Mike McGurk. Doc Diamond will be back. Rock musician, bass player Donnie Rocket will be here. George Anastasia will return. Hillbilly Jim will join us. Jack Victory is coming back. Michael Armageddon Murphy will be joining us, our buddy Mike Murphy. Stephen Plim is coming back to join us again, as is the return of Vince Russo and one half of the Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton, will be joining us. Yeah, buddy. What do you think? Not too bad.
I think you just listed half of my favorites growing up.
The old man's been overtime working.
I know when you called me the other day and told me you had some names, I couldn't imagine.
Brother, let me tell you how many pairs of pantyhose I went through on the street corner. Okay? This is when people want to know how I get guests. I stand out there in my short shorts and fishnets, okay?
We'll interview for food, right?
Shit. Oh, and we're going to talk about this. This is really, really important. Really, really important. We are going to have a medical doctor on the show. He is actually my personal physician.
Okay.
He is also, as you can imagine, he is also a wrestling doctor.
Oh,
he is I don't mean he wrestles. He's not a.
Yeah, no, I knew what you meant. He's a medical backstage personnel for
exactly. Yes, he's that kind of wrestling doctor. Dr. David Neidorf is going to be joining us. He is my personal physician, and we're going to talk about wrestling injuries. We're going to talk about the dangers of pre and post concussion syndrome. We're going to talk a little bit about CTE, and we're just going to get into a kind of a crash course in wrestling medicine 101 from Dr. David Neidorf.
Nice.
Courtesy of Virtua Medical Group in New Jersey. Well, they're all across the country, but Dr. Neidorf will be joining us, and I'm very appreciative of that. So, Dan, what do you got going on? What's happening in the world of Dan the Man?
Well, just settling in. You know, I was out of town, got some stuff taken care of here. Running around trying to get everything back up and running. Obviously, you saw the technical issues I had before the show, which thankfully it looks like we've worked through.
Yeah, Skype had a little bit of a technical.
Yeah, Skype's a fickle mistress.
Yeah.
But other than that, getting back into the swing of things, trying to sort out other online activities, and everything else is just business as usual, as they say. Same old shit.
I hear you, brother. I hear you. Well, over here on this end of the camera and microphone, the old guy has been busy trying to put the best shows together that we can. I think we've done a pretty damn good job. We're going to be doing, and Dan and I talked about this on a few episodes back. Dan and I are going to be doing a lot more non-wrestling episodes, but with kind of like a wrestling feel. Our core, Dan, our core product is always wrestling. We've told everybody that. Yeah. And so, for example, when we had George Anastasia on, now you wouldn't think that, what connection could there possibly be to George Anastasia? Well, actually, there was quite a few wrestling connections. Len Montana from The Godfather.
Yep.
Who was a professional wrestler who performed in The Godfather. Of course, wrestling as a front for organized crime to launder money, but boxing, wrestling, sports in general. But wrestling's a big part of that.
Growing up,
there's a wrestling connection to pretty much everything we do. Including with musician rock bassist Donnie Rocket, who, and I encourage you to look him up. He is on Facebook. His page is called Rocketology, and he is a slam and bass player. His name is Donnie Rocket. I've known him. Oh my God, I've known Donnie for, hard to imagine, almost 40 years.
Damn.
That's longer than you are old.
Yes.
And that's saying some shit.
Yeah. Right?
Well, folks, another great episode. Short, sweet, and to the point. We're going to try, and that's another thing, we're going to try and keep our episodes to an hour and maybe an hour and 20 minutes, hour and a half tops. Because when you have Stephen Plim or Vince Russo, you got to do at least an hour and a half. Russo's he's gonna cut me a promo on that one.
Hey, you know what?
But we love Vince Russo here, and Vince will be back. As will Stephen Plim. Oh, that's right. The September 22nd, Stephen Plim's coming back.
There you go.
So we're gonna have a good time with Steve Plim we're gonna finish up talking about Tiny Tim, and we're gonna talk about personnel management and how you get into show business. Management and agenting, and some of the horror stories that Steven encountered.
I'll bet
he got in because he was a musician, Dan. I don't know if you know
right.
that.
No, he touched on that, how he started.
He had a rock band
on the stage, right?
Yeah, he was a part of a 1960s rock band. They had a couple of records. I don't know offhand what they were. I'll have to go Google them. But Stephen Plim will be back on the 22nd. In the meantime, we encourage everybody, happy wrestling. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next time on Wrestling with the Future. Bye-bye.
Good night.